Going?
Oh, not too bad. How you doing?
Terrible.
Terrible?
Yeah, this is day 37 for Jennifer in jail.
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 The last time we spoke, they took her down to the border, and then they wouldn't take the New York guy wouldn't take her, right?
She was brought to the border 5 times.
5 times.
Dumped on the other side of the border and walked back.
Wow.
So she's in jail and has been going back and forth from the detention center, which is in Ottawa, to court appearances in Brockville, demanding a change of venue. They won't allow the change of venue because they control, border guards control everything in Brockville. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, justice of the peace, they control them all. So she's supposed to go on Wednesday next week again, and they said that it's to set a trial date, but she fired her legal aid lawyer on Friday and doesn't have a replacement yet. And the border guards are trying to get her committed to a mental institution for a 30-day assessment. And you know what they can do in those places.
Oh, yeah.
Fill them up with drugs and whatever. So she's fighting that on the one hand, trying to get a trial date on the other hand that would be after a date where she'd find a lawyer from out of town. We thought we had one yesterday, but he refused to drive to Brockville from Ottawa. Now there's another prospect in the wings that the cell is looking into. Apparently somebody who has contacts or has been investigating the Ontario Provincial Police and the Premier. So I don't know what will happen, but this is day 37. And 5 times without 1 cent in her pocket, without any clothes, except what she was wearing when she was working out with the cats and stuff. They dumped her across the border. And the U.S. border, at first time, they took her from the border to Watertown in a kind of a halfway house. The guy in charge said, no way. Without a deportation order, this is illegal. Pay her back. So they brought her to the border and drove across and said, we can't accept this. And so they've tried in the middle of the night, change of shift, early morning, mid-afternoon during the rush hour, and each time the U.S. border says, hey, you're free to go. You can go whatever direction you want. And she walks back across, gets arrested at the Canadian border again, and back in jail.
Wow, that's insane.
And all of it has no reason from the day she arrived at the border in 2010, and two women were standing waiting for her, knew she was coming, refused her entry even though she said we had just been married in the month of June. This was July the 4th. And nobody even called me. She was the only one who was able to call me from her cell phone after they refused her entry and after they gave her a 1-year return date. And then that 1-year return date was extended at the Ogdensburg border for another year. And only a year and a half later, after we had defined that the Minister of Public Safety was the guy who was in charge of her file, not citizenship and immigration, and that he had raped her when she was younger. Not only after that, and informing the Prime Minister and the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration and the RCMP, did they let her come for weekends.
Oh, yeah.
And the place she was living in was kind of a rooming house, or a room on top of a house. I don't know if you saw it when you were there. But the guy who owned the place told her that she was the best tenant they ever had. And then one day she gets a phone call from his wife from downstairs instead of knocking on the door and coming up. And she said, "I want you out by the end of the month." And Jennifer had run out of money and went to legal aid and social services. They wouldn't give her anything except food stamps. And on the coldest day of the winter, she ended up on the street, drove her vehicle up to Canton where the social services were, and a guy in charge by the name of Patrick Hand said that she only had one option, and that was they would send her to Messina to live in a motel with 3 days paid by social services, and then she had to be out of there and into a rented place. And they wouldn't give her any more than $400 for rent if she found a place. And she said, there's no place anywhere for $400 a month. And then she was back out on the street, and I got a message from the cell saying they'll never let her get there. Even if she drove to Messina, she'll never get there. Either they'll kidnap her or kill her. So I told her then, well, the only option left is refugee status at the Canadian border, without knowing ahead of time that there is a contractual obligation signed by the Canadian and U.S. government since 9/11, saying that no refugee status can be granted by the other one, since both countries would never, ever do anything that would require a person applying for refugee status. But they went through extreme motions. You're supposed to fill your papers within 15 days, which she did. 260 pages she presented. And then a decision is made within a week and you're deported. But for her, they dragged it on for, 2 years?
Right.
Bringing us in for recorded meetings so that they could not only question her but question me in Montreal, right next to McGill University, where MK Ultra was identified as having occurred, mind control paid by the CIA and done by the Montreal Neurological Institute, including Dr. Wilder Penfield, the guy who probably genetically engineered Jennifer for the Grey Nuns, something that was illegal for him to do, but he resigned his position, I think it was 1954, and Jennifer was born 1955. Her birth certificate says California, but it's months after the event supposedly occurred. And according to the cell, she was either born to a nun in Ogdensburg and transferred to Western Canada, and then from Montana down to California, or born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and transferred down through Montana to California. One thing that Jennifer discovered was in 1955, there was a story in the paper about the Grey Nuns in Ogdensburg who lived in the Ford Mansion, the mansion that formerly belonged to the Ford family. And on the top floor, over 200 babies were placed out for demonstration, and people in the area were notified from Canada and the U.S. that if they were looking for a child, they could come and pick one out.
Sure.
And it's believed that Jennifer was one of those babies that was picked out and brought to Western Canada, then down to California.
Wow.
So now, when the Refugee Board ended its sessions, we got no letter from the judge, but only a letter from a guy in the office that the judge had described, oh, he's just an office boy. And when we saw his name on it saying that refugee status had been denied, the next step is to go to appeal to the federal court. So Jennifer called the guy and said, I need a letter from the judge that heard the case over the last couple of years, and we need that to bring it to the federal court. He said, we don't give out letters signed by judges. I sign them. And she said, you're just an office boy. He said, I'm an anthropologist.
Sure.
So it confirmed what the cell was saying, that decisions made on immigration into Canada since at least 9/11 and probably earlier are not made on the needs that Canada has, since the Minister of Health said what they really need in Canada are people with administrative skills taking care of long-term Alzheimer patients. That's exactly Jennifer's role as Director of Nursing in a 99-bed lockdown unit in California. But that didn't matter. What mattered, that her gene pool didn't match the sleeper cell qualities that they want imported into Canada so that they can infiltrate, as they have with the border guards, all of the human resources and other areas of control, like Revenue Canada and Refugee Canada and Hydro and Bell and all of the services, so that they can work the ground floor, act as secretaries, as receptionists, as computer operators who receive the mail by computer, all of those things, so they can cull the information for whoever is paying them on top of the salary they are receiving from the government of Canada. And the logical prospects are being defined by the cell. And if you leave out the obvious prospect of the group of gray nuns who made her in the first place, genetically engineered, then De Beers, the diamond people, are likely to be involved. And they've established a base. They moved from South Africa and have established a base at James Bay. And apparently there's big diamond mine discoveries. They won't say how big, but the taxes that they have paid has surpassed the $1 billion a year mark or something.
No.
So there's a lot of other things that I don't have time to get into about other people, other groups that can be involved as well, including the OPP, the City Hall here, because this is a township, not a town. And a ship symbol is that a journey once began on a raft and has circumscribed the planet and come back as a ship. In other words, it went out and improved its knowledge and now is a ship, and the raft is supposed to have departed from the Bruce Peninsula, which is the toe at the of the boot that is Ontario on the western side. Native mythology talks about human beings being created in that area and being shipped out on a raft down the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico and across to North Africa, eventually to work its way to Ur in Mesopotamia, which is where historians tell you it began. But according to native mythology, it began here instead, and that was the birth of a specific gene pool called Caucasians.
Mm-hmm.
So Jennifer is languishing in a prison. They invent charges like they wanted the OPP to come here and arrest Jennifer, but the OPP said, we can't do that because you don't have a legal document that says she's to be deported. So they invented charges against Jennifer. I don't even know what they are, just long enough to tell the OPP that they're getting the papers, go and get her. And that's when they came and got her, and they never received any papers. And as soon as Jennifer appeared in court on the border, she was told that all other charges but deportation had been dropped. So they didn't want a record established that could be read later on how they manipulated the Ontario Provincial Police to come and pick her up here. And the way they did it was they came in two cars, one regular OPP car that drove into our front yard, while the other ones, unmarked, stayed on the street. And as soon as the dogs across the street started to bark, and I was having an episode on my hydrocele there, or hernia, Jennifer went out to the front to look. And as soon as she passed the OPP car that was in our yard, he kind of hustled her into the driveway just off the street. And the other guy jumped out of the other car and put handcuffs on her and said, oh, this is public property, so we can arrest you here.
Wow. Shady.
I mean...
Are you talking to her, or
on the telephone? I have no idea what the bill will be at the end of this month.
She's calling you? Is that what she's doing?
Yeah,
okay.
3 or 4 times a day. So the bill will come in the first week of next month. Anyways. It's given me today 37 days to cry with nobody seeing for what's happened to Canada, what's happened to the province of Ontario, what's happened to the municipality here, what's happened to the OPP, what's happening to the hospital where they killed Tom. added to Jennifer, and I don't like putting it in the same group because that sounds self-serving, that I care only about my concern and my wife, but it's not just Jennifer, it's what's happening as these cells, these sleeper cells, are raised and put in positions of control over the controllers by being at the bottom and preventing information from rising to the top.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty frustrating.
Yeah. And there are hints, of course, that some of this is happening in the U.S. as well. One of the suspects, apart from De Beers, is a company called Research in Motion, RIM.
Yeah.
Research in Motion is or was the original name of BlackBerry.
Right.
The telephone company, BlackBerry. And you know who has a BlackBerry in the U.S.? Obama.
Obama?
Yeah. That's what all the leaders of the world are using because of their proven advanced security.
Yeah.
Even though they were going bankrupt, they claimed they were going bankrupt, the whole bankruptcy baloney was done so that the Chinese could take control at a low price. And there's a Chinese guy in charge of Research in Motion now.
Yeah.
So there's a move to take over Canada. There's a move on land by the Chinese. Seems to be a competition against the Japanese, but the Japanese don't have anywhere close to the abilities the Chinese have. And then there's creation's problem. Creation is watching what's going on with the Lu at the Sioux. And according to the cell, the people who are in charge on a worldwide basis, and I believe that what they had mentioned at first, ecclesiastic Freemasonry, is what the official name is. What they are planning is a destruction of 6 billion of the 7 billion people on the planet, so that they can then go and lie fallow for a while and come back, and through genetic engineering and the 1 billion people left in South America, South Africa, and Australia, New Zealand, and New Zealand is probably the headquarters. That group wants to explore space and requires a different human being than the one that exists today. We've discussed that. A woman does not require 2 breasts, and therefore one can be used for hidden technology. the male is irrelevant if the woman becomes hermaphroditic, as she once was. And that's what would be done for the area above the 53rd parallel north. A new population of these hermaphrodites for outer space, kept on Earth for 6 years and put in a acorn-looking capsule, sent out to some rock beyond the solar system in the Oort cloud. The age of 6 would be the departure point, the arrival point. 34 years later, life begins at 40, and they would explore. Every one of them would get a different rock to look at. And in order to do that, they must begin the killing of people by killing those people who can most interfere and have the most knowledge. And that means border guards and policemen.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to have the Lou at the Sioux. Creation, of course, has the ability to stop it. But at the same time, the people who would die first are the worst of the worst. Guards and policemen.
Right.
So what do? Do you let the mess continue by stopping the Lou at the Sioux, or do you let it happen and then step in afterwards? And at least the majority of the people who are criminally insane at the border and in the police will have been washed away from North America. But the water is intended, of course, to flow away from the border and over land in the U.S. down to Flushing Meadow. So it's the part that affects you guys in New York. The UN and all of that is all part of what they want to wipe out.
Yeah, that's the... Well, if the cell wants to open up a little portal for me to jump into, and that's happening, I'll gladly jump in, you know?
Yeah. I got to go now. Sorry, but I'm getting a call.
Okay.
Bye for now.
All right. Okay.